I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader and it's time to make the chaos visible, this is the podcast you want to be listening to. Here's what we know to be true about change. It is messy. It is complex. It is confusing. It is non-linear. I mean, we know this is a lived experience, and some of us probably know the theory of complexity, but I bet for most of us in practice, we just don't know what to do with that. I mean, we keep using old tools to try and navigate complexity, our complex organizations. And for me anyway, I find most complexity practitioners in the world, well, they only make it worse. They make it more complicated, more confusing, less easy to understand. In short, help. Help me with complexity. So, Dr. Leyla Acaroglu is here to the rescue. She is a systems thinker, a designer, also a champion and a provocateur for sustainability. I came across an article that she'd written. It's called Tools for System Thinkers, the 6 fundamental concepts of systems thinking. And it was elegant, and it was deep, and it was useful, and I knew I needed to have a conversation. So, Leyla, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you here. I'd love to start by just understanding why systems thinking and complexity attached to that just feels so hard to understand or just hard to get into for so many people. I mean, why is it so difficult to get over there?
Well, maybe let me start with a quick 101. So systems thinking is about understanding the relationship between things. Most of us have been engineered to see the world in one-dimensional, siloed and reductive ways. And that is absolutely a product of our education system, right. Meaning that we go to an English class and a science class and a math class, and somehow they stay in their little boxes and we don't see the interconnection between them because obviously science is math and art is science, etc. Yes. And ultimately what happens as a byproduct of that reductionist worldview and perspective, right. We don't see the deep, complex roots of the systems around us. Now, that's not the case for everybody. This is just a generalization, but it's pretty common. And from my own experience, when I uncovered systems thinking, I was doing my PhD and I happened to just stumble across an article and I was like, mind blown, because I was like, this makes sense. Of course, everything's interconnected and interdependent and all things require other things to exist. And hang on, why didn't anyone teach me this? Like, I should know this. I'm doing a bloody PhD. And so I got very, very excited about this concept and then about how to apply this concept in the world. And that was where, for me, it kind of got a little bit sticky because, as you said, a lot of the content out there is theoretical and very much based on, you can do causal loop diagrams and all of these kind of like, a bit boring things. And so I wanted to figure out how I could make systems thinking work for me as a designer, as a practitioner in sustainability. And that was really about exploring what systems exist in the world around me and how they impact and affect me. And so a lot of the reasons I think people find systems thinking difficult to get into is because perhaps the first entry point is the complexity approach. And I always advise a kind of leveling up series. So there's this great article written by a guy called Draper Kaufman. It's called Systems 1. And you can find it online. It's a PDF and it's gorgeous. It's got little illustrations. It was written, I think, in the 80s. Beautiful. But it is just the most succinct explanation of what is going on in systems. And then you go to Donella Meadows, who's a bit more complicated. You got Peter Senge and stuff. And these are people who have written about this and in ways that is really understandable.
Dropping in to say, look, we'll definitely add links to the show notes for these resources. I mean, Meadows and Senge, perhaps you know about them. I've heard of them before. I know their work. But Kaufman was a totally new name for me.
So I think realistically to answer your question, it's how you get into it, and it's also how it applies to you. It needs to make sense to you as a person, and that can be different. The flavor of that can be different depending on what you do, who you are, your pre-existing knowledge set. But yeah, I'm from Australia, and we have one of the oldest known continuous living populations in the world, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community here, and it's fascinating to see now with all the knowledge I have that how I was could have just learned this had Indigenous knowledge systems been available to me. Unfortunately, in my educational experience, it wasn't at all. And so now there's really an ability to tap into these First Nations knowledge systems around the world that have this deep entanglement understanding, like how the world, the natural world works and our role within that natural world. It's so beautiful and it's so practical and often very spiritual for First Nations people. So it's really about a respectful engagement of these knowledge systems and a kind of reawakening of them because they've just been sleeping for a couple hundred years. So that's another deep passion of mine, is to respectfully engage with First Nations knowledge systems and help elevate the way in which we can solve some of our most complex challenges with them.
And before we go on, I'm actually keen to find someone to teach us about some Indigenous wisdoms that might be helpful in the context of change and transformation. So if you're listening and you know exactly the person I should be talking to, please email me. You can email me at podcast@thechangesignal.com and tell me who I should know about. So the people listening to this are the people trying to lead change in organizations, and they'll have a degree of knowledge about systems thinking ranging from 0 out of 10 to, let's say, 6 out of 10. So where do I start as a change leader?
I mean, systems mapping as a practice is critical. I highly recommend always starting with a pen and paper based systems map, working with embracing a chaos-based map of interconnections and then advancing to, say, more specific maps like causal loop diagrams. Once you start doing them, it becomes natural for your brain to do them in real time, and you don't need to necessarily be drawing them out. It is very matrixy, I'm not going to lie. But it is a practice that you need to develop. Like when you go to the gym, you do need to start with the easier weights until you can build up to the stronger ones, because you are essentially retraining your brain to think differently about the world around it and to see things that are not obvious as the primary influencing forces and factors. So,
I love that.
That's a kind of stage step.
Leyla, how do we apply systems mapping to organizational change?
Look, every organization is an ecosystem.
Yes.
It is a system that is made up of the agents that exist within it. And the cultural perspective, the worldview, the values, these are all massively important ingredients to understand and identify. And so you need to be able to understand these dynamics to then come in and intentionally intervene in that system to create a different outcome, right? And an intervention often happens at a point in the system, not that's weak, but that is needing that intervention to transform the way the system's dynamics are at play. Okay, so I created a methodology called the disruptive design method, and it's really about using this systems approach to solve complex problems. And the central part of that is you do a systems map to identify those points of intervention, and you kind of come at it from that bird's eye view, right? Here's this complex, interconnected, dynamic, chaotic system. What's going on? Oh my God, it's overwhelming. Everybody gets overwhelmed at the beginning. But you've made this snapshot, right? Yeah. And that snapshot is then visible from that bird's eye perspective. And from that perspective, you can be like, there's a point of intervention.
Let me offer up a strategic question inspired by what Leyla's just said. Of all the places we might make an intervention, which place feels like it has the most potential?
There's something that we can now start to actually work on. We can design an intervention, whether that be changing a policy within the organization that changes the way in which managers work with each other, or that could be a different hiring practice that just helps to change that dynamic. All of these things are designed intentionally to transform the system. Now, they're not always going to get the outcomes you want because complex systems breed complex outcomes. But because you've understood the system, you've designed to work within it, the likelihood of you getting outcomes that are more in line with your desired direction are much greater than if you were to come into that system and go, oh, look, you know what? We just need to do this simple solution to this complex problem. We don't really know what's going to happen as a result of it. Yeah.
Help bring to life for me how to do a systems map, because I kind of get that in theory-ish. But if I'm a change leader, I'm like, oh, I'm sensing the power of creating a systems map. But how do I go about actually starting to map out a system so I can see it and therefore get to a place where I'm like, well, where would it be interesting to do an intervention?
Yeah, sure. So I like to start with what I just call an analog. It's a cluster map, I call it, but it could also just be called a chaos map as well.
I love that term. It's like chaos map is great.
Just capture the chaos. And that is the thing that I get everybody to do is like, do not self-censor, do not edit, and do not try and control this system. You are spending 20 minutes identifying everything that you know to be possible within this system.
Okay.
And that would be get a large piece of paper, throw down the concept or the area that you're looking to explore. And I always get people to start with education because everybody's been educated in some way and they understand that system quite intimately. And then it's not a mind map. So you're not going, here's the root cause and we're kind of drawing out from it and you're taking a node and then you're drawing a connection to another node. It's not like you're going, education requires teachers and teachers require their own education. You're saying, yes, there are teachers, there are books, there's schools, there's power, there's religion, there's pineapples. And I swear to God, you'd be able to get pineapples in there somehow because everything is interconnected. And that is the first rule of systems thinking. Everything at some point is interconnected to something else, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're almost like trying to capture that broadest dump of concepts, what we call nodes, the things that exist within the system. You're trying to capture them and almost splatter them on the page. And once your page is filled with those nodes, you're going to start drawing connections.
You're throwing down all the concepts, all the words that you can think of. So literally book, school, teacher, pineapple, all of that. You got that on the paper. Right.
Yeah, just throw it down anywhere. Don't do lists. Don't just avoid the list. You just throw, and I usually do this with a few people. So you got like 3 or 4 people all working on one page and it goes anywhere. It doesn't matter because ultimately what you're doing is you're just trying to capture these concepts to then build. I can hear my dog barking in the background.
A little bit of chaos map happening in the background. It's fantastic.
He's got an opinion of how to do a system.
I love that. That's great. You know, as growing up as a kid, we had this big drawer of Lego. And it was kind of every Lego has got a set. It was kind of just the blocks. And we were used to just tip the whole thing out. And then it would be all about kind of building and connecting from that. And the way you're describing this takes me back to my childhood, remembering this kind of Lego box.
So fun fact, when I first started doing my PhD, which for anyone listening who's done a PhD, you'd know how like personally torturous it is. And I didn't really know what I was doing. So I actually, and I've never admitted this before, got Lego. And this was before I had really advanced my systems thinking skill set, but it was super like burgeoning inside me. And I printed out all the words that were related to my PhD work and stuck them on Lego pieces and then built metaphorical walls of those concepts together. I still have the box of Lego with stickers on them somewhere.
That's so good. That's so good.
Because it is really about that tactile experience. You're trying to force your brain to stop doing the natural things that it's been taught to do, such as editing, such as hierarchy, such as structure. And these are not bad things. These are just things that usually impede us from thinking about things in a dynamic, interconnected, interdependent way.
Perfect.
So with the map, once you've thrown all your nodes down, like all these little islands of ideas, and they usually are 1 or 2 words, not much more than that. They're a little capsule that holds everything that word means to you. And then you start drawing the connections and relationships. And this is where I say you're going for a spaghetti mess.
Right.
You're not trying to create a piece of, clarity and artwork. It's an exploration of the complexity of the system. So once you started to draw lines everywhere that connect, all the different parts of your complex puzzle you've laid out, you could use different colors to indicate different things. For example, you could use a color to indicate power dynamics, one to indicate, social interactions, another one to indicate financial flows, or you could just do whatever the hell makes sense to you just to get that perspective shift, because then, and I've taught this to thousands upon thousands of people, and never have I experienced anyone where this doesn't happen to them. You emerge new insights into different dynamics within that system.
Right.
An insight is a perspective that was not obvious, or if it was obvious, it's now been reinforced in a way that makes it clearer and more to the point than it was previously. And a lot of the time, those insights are connected to the areas where there's lots of flows and connections. So you'll have these parts of the map where it's just like everything is leading to it, and you start to question and interrogate why. And you're really, what we talk about in systems thinking is the iceberg model, where you have the tip of the iceberg, but what's at the bottom of that iceberg is what we call mental models. They're the cognitive structures that reinforce the systems that are at play in the world around us, because unfortunately or fortunately, we are humans stuck in our human-centric or anthropocentric worldview.
Right.
So everything that we choose to understand, we're doing it from that perspective of, mental models being a human in a human body with our language sets and our understanding of the world and our structured worldview. So, it's very liberating to do this. It is also a great tool for collaboration.
I love the fact that making your chaos map, not just by you, but by you and others, inherently, reveals more of the system that you didn't know, B, makes it more chaotic because they're writing in the places you didn't want them to write, and they're writing in a different way that you would write, and they're putting things next to words that you wouldn't put next to words.
Or you're going, oh my God, I can't believe that of course I hadn't thought about that. That happens all the time too.
Pineapples, I would never have thought of pineapples. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To connect with Leyla Acaroglu, head for her website, and I'll spell that out for you. Leyla, Leyla, Acaroglu, Acaroglu.com. Leyla also writes a lot on Medium, and she has a LinkedIn newsletter and also a bi-monthly newsletter through unschool.co as well. So check all of those things out. You must get to a place, Leyla, where you've put out all the things that you can think of for now on your system. And as you said, your reaction to that is, holy cow, there's a lot of stuff here in that place of overwhelm. How do you help
that
people?
Doesn't happen.
No? Is that right?
It's really weird. It very rarely happens that someone goes, now I'm more overwhelmed than when I started. Most of the time people are like, oh, now I have some clarity and perspective that I formerly felt overwhelmed by, but now there's these emergent properties, because emergence is a key concept in systems thinking, that have come out of this system that are now glaringly obvious to me when formerly I was not aware of these things. What really happens here is that the brain is then comfortable with the chaos. A lot of people, when they start this, they feel very uncomfortable. And you have to really, as a facilitator, get people to lean into the discomfort. It's only 20 minutes of your life and it is not going to break anything. You are just going to get this moment where you don't have to write a list and you can just throw things on the page and you just get to draw spaghetti maps like you're a 12-year-old again, okay? But the reason I was saying it's really good for projects is if you're starting a project with a new team of people, you need to align on your perspectives of that topic. And so what I've also uncovered over the years of doing this is that very rarely do people fight or argue. It's so strange. And my assumption is because it's equality in action. Everybody's got a pen. Everybody's contributing. So one of the rules I make is you cannot scribe. You can't be the person going, oh, John, what do you want? Sally, what's your idea? Sally, John, Peter, Paul, everybody else needs to have their own pen and they need to be contributing to the map equally. Then you're not arguing over the validity of your contributions. You're seeking out the relationship between those contributions. So you're actually additive. It's an additive experience. It's not a reductive experience. And that's what we're trying to overcome, that reduction, that desire to try and break things down, eliminate or whatever. Now, there are other maps you can do that are about elimination. They are about synthesis, and they're a bit more advanced and they're used for different things. But to get started, this is like my go-to. And I cannot stress enough how powerful, wonderful, and useful it is as an experiment or an experience to do. And I do have another Medium article that explains in detail how to do this online as well with visual graphics to show you how to do it.
That's great. Well, we're going to share all these articles in the show notes for sure. Leyla, you said that as people create this chaos map, they're not overwhelmed, but actually it's like they're being given permission to see the chaos that is there as actually being there. And also these new emergent insights and connections come out, and they're starting to see things that they just hadn't noticed before. And I think you said that what becomes apparent is potential places for intervention. How do you notice those places? And how do you balance your own biases and your own frameworks in terms of what you're choosing to notice as the places for intervention?
Well, first of all, we are all stuck in our own biases. You can adjust your biases.
Yeah.
You could definitely work on reframing your biases, but we are biased beings, right? Like humans are riddled with cognitive biases that influence more than we would care to want to share or know. So in one way, recognizing biases and acknowledging them is a pretty, empathetic way to approach this. And also accepting that that's going to be the case of anybody else you're working with. Yeah, you can't avoid your biases, but you should be very cognizant of them and how they may be influencing the decisions or thoughts you're having. I would say that insights are in one of the key concepts of systems thinking is emergence. Emergence is the concept of how things come out of a system based on the conditions of which the thing was in, right? And so when you're seeking an insight or a perspective or a point of intervention, it's an emergent outcome of the system in that moment under those conditions. So if you were looking at an organization, for example, you'd be trying to understand the dominant dynamics that are at play that are creating the outcomes, desirable or undesirable, that you're seeking to work with. Okay. So it's very likely that within any business system, you're going to have people who are not happy.
Yeah.
They might not make it obvious, but their work quality might be an indication. Or the number of sick days they have, or what they've said to their colleagues. And that's fine. People are absolutely entitled to have periods of dissatisfaction, but it's not helpful for an organization to have consistent dissatisfaction with its team.
So another strategic or systems question inspired here by Leyla. Does this thing we're observing, does it feel like a passing phenomenon or a standing one? I mean, will this unknot and evolve, or will it stay knotted? And what does that tell us about how we might intervene or not?
So that is a dynamic. That is a condition that is going to breed particular outcomes, because an unhappy person is probably going to make comments to other people, and we are social beings and we're going to reference what other people feel. And not only that, it's always changing.
Right.
So their dissatisfaction is not a permanent state. It's either getting worse or better. Perhaps there are periods where it's staying the same, but it's likely that their dissatisfaction is reinforced by other people. So let's say you're unhappy at work, something happens, your boss does something that, pisses you off, and you have a coffee break with one of your other colleagues and you guys both confirm this dissatisfaction. That now reinforces the dissatisfaction. But then there's another person who's like, no, I don't think that's a problem at all. The two people who were like dissatisfied now have to reflect on their dissatisfaction and determine whether they want to, reinforce it or adjust it. So, everything is constantly changing, and it's a dynamic reaction to the things that are in the systems, and any input could change it completely at any time in any way, That dissatisfied person could start a new relationship and suddenly be happy, and then they change their perspective, or they could, they've been in pain. Maybe they've had a medical issue and that's made them grumpy, and then that gets fixed and their worldview changes. This is life, right? That we're not static, one-dimensional beings.
Leyla, you talk about the system. It feels very true, the sense of emergent and the fluidity of it. And I can see two reactions to it. One is terror. Just like, oh my God, it's all emergent, it's all shifting, it's all changing. What the hell can I do with that? But it feels like there's another way of sitting here, which is like, this is a liberating insight if I'm thinking about change within an organization. So move me from terror to liberation, if that's possible.
It's a real spectrum. It's a big spectrum. Look, I think that ultimately, if you are tasked with the responsibility of changing an organization. You are tasked with the responsibility of being in a dynamic response to that complex organism, right? So
That's wonderful.
You're not there to capture it in some liquid so that it never changes ever. You're there to be part of its flow, its ebb and flow, so that you're getting it to whatever that desired outcome is. And obviously, I'm sure nearly everyone listening would be familiar with the theory of change concept, which I highly recommend using if you're trying to apply, which if you're not, I'll just say it's a method where you kind of reverse engineer change. You set with the goal and then you go back through like, what are the outcomes that you would need to see in order to get that goal? What are the outputs that you would need to see from a set of actions that you take? And then what are the inputs that you need to get those actions, to get those outputs, to get that outcome?
Right.
And it's like actually so much easier because you are creating a pathway of change and transformation. And I guess like a systems perspective gives you the tools to understand that dynamic and feedback. It also gives you the agency to be constantly tweaking and iterating and adjusting as the system changes, rather than assuming it's static or that people's behaviors are going to be the same regardless of, certain things. So it is quite liberating, actually. So I would say then the way to get to liberation is to just lean into the experience of things not being static and try thinking about things from a more dynamic way and see what outcomes you get. Because I would find it very hard for you to not get better outcomes if you were applying a systems perspective.
Capture the chaos. Find and claim your part in the chaos. I mean, you're not stuck in traffic. You are the traffic. And know as you capture the chaos, it is still obviously some version of chaos, but seeing it and being in it in all its messy mix of the visible and the invisible, the human and the non-human, is, I think, essential for all of us as transformational leaders. Thanks for listening along. I do appreciate your support. The many of you who've left a review, thank you for that. Post it on LinkedIn. Make sure you tag me if you do. And also recommend a favorite episode to a friend. There's always more at thechangesignal.com, including the regular newsletter. Hey, thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.